Hello, everybody. I'm David Gossel-Chalté, and it's a pleasure for me to present you some results of my PhD, which was defended in July 2020, supervised by François Gerold and Vincent Robin, and which treat about the role of past human activities as spatio-temporal determinants of the ecological quality of headwater streams. Paleoecology and historical ecology give us the opportunity to reconstruct the evolution of ecosystems in the past and the influence of human activities on this evolution of ecosystems. But today, management and recovering of good quality of environments lesser consider the impact, the influence of this history of ecosystems. So we try to ask to respond to the question, what is the influence of the legacy of old activities in environments on actual characteristics and ecological integrity and quality of ecosystems? And this question seemed to be really important to ask, especially for headwater ecosystems. Headwater ecosystems are at the beginning of the river networks, generally classified as the rank 1 in the Strahler classification. And these ecosystems, the functioning, ecological functioning and trophic network of these ecosystems is highly dependent of inputs of organic matter from the vegetation that is close to the stream. And the quality of this organic matter, this litter, put it in the stream, condition the functioning and the conditions of the trophic network and of the community of detritivores, predators, and other colonizators of this organic matter. They are, of course, dependent of abiotic parameters, but the condition of the vegetation close to the streams is really important. But in Europe, especially, forests and woodlands have supported a lot of activities from human, today, of course, but also in the past. And one of these activities was the charcoal production, especially during the Industrial Revolution. Charcoal production was made by cutting the trees in the forest, in the woodland, put it onto a platform, and then burn in anoxic conditions in order to produce charcoal as a fuel for industries and iron forge, for example, or iron smelting. And today we can find a lot of these old places in the forests, and they are a very interesting anthropological archives in order to reconstruct the forest at the period of production of charcoal. But we can think also that this is a place with a soil modified, anthropically modified, and so it could have an influence on the functioning of woodlands and in another hand of the streams close to these woodlands. So during this PhD, we try to ask to these questions, what are the physicochemical and functional characteristics of some headwater streams close to ancient places of charcoal productions? What is clearly the distribution and the anthropological composition of historical charcoal production sites in order to reconstruct the composition of the forest in the past and to estimate the impact of charcoal production during the evolution of the woodland. And finally, we made a transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary approach in order to disentangle the influence of the legacy of charcoal production on the characteristics of aquatic ecosystems actually. We made this study in the northern Vosges, Vosges du Nord, at the border with Germany. This is a place with a few human activity today in terms of industrial activities. But in the past, there are some activities like forges and iron smelting in some villages in northern Vosges. And we can find today some legacies of these activities in the landscapes like charcoal production sites. We made a protocol around the Zinzal du Nord River, and especially on 8 little catchments around this river, here represented in red. We anthropologically analyzed charcoal production sites, 120 more precisely, 30 charcoal production sites in 4 catchments in order to have an analysis of charcoal production sites in many type of places, of topographical places, and of type of ecosystemic conditions. And also, we made in parallel of this approach of historical ecology, approaches of ecological functioning by measuring physical, chemical, and biotic parameters on 16 stations, 2 stations by catchments, 1 upstream and 1 downstream for these 8 catchments. So first, we have realized radiocarbon datations on 46 charcoal production sites in these catchments, and we found a period of charcoal production between the 17th and the early 20th century. And these dates are coherent with administrative archives of tree cutting that can be found in some villages in northern Vosges. And this is also coherent with activities of iron smelting and forges, which are known to be between the 17th and the early 20th century. We analyze also the taxonomical spectra of the charcoal sample in this CPS. Fagus was highly dominant in the taxonomical spectra with more than 16%, followed by Quercus at 27%, and other species in lesser proportion. Here is the first interesting results showing that Pinus represents only 3% of the total samples, whereas coniferous species, and especially Pinus, today represent more than 30% of trees in actual woodlands. We made an approach also to determine the influence of some topographical parameters on the distribution of the different anthropological taxa in the CPS. Here we can see the relationship between 4 parameters of the topography and the most represented taxa in the CPS. And we can find here, for example, that Quercus is highly correlated with the altitude, whereas at the opposite, Carpinus is negatively correlated with the altitude, and so it is more present in lower area. That is coherent with the ecological needs of this species, which grow faster in condition of high soils, more present in lower places of the slopes. We also analyze the distribution of the taxa according to the exposure of the slopes. And we can find here that Quercus and Pinus are more represented and dominant for Quercus in the south, southwest, and west slopes, whereas at the opposite, in other slopes, Fagus is dominant. This result is also coherent with the ecological needs of this species, because Fagus is highly dominant and can grow in shaded conditions, whereas Quercus need to be in unlighted, sun-exposed conditions to be dominant on Fagus. So this is a first result that can show that in the past, at the period of charcoal production, the distribution of the species seemed to be dependent of topographical, we can say, natural parameters. In the other hand, we tried to know if the presence of charcoal production sites, places rich in charcoal, can have an influence on the parameters of the ecosystems. We sampled leaves on a transect from the middle of the CPS on some trees, and we measure in these leaves the proportion of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sodium, and magnesium, and we have found that there is a significant decrease of phosphorus when we go farther, more far, we increase the distance from the CPS. So it seems to have an influence of the presence of charcoal production sites on the enrichment of phosphorus in the vegetation. This is results that is important to consider, of course, with the density of all the charcoal production sites present in these landscapes. And this density was measured using LIDAR data. So we made a LIDAR teledetection protocol on all the surface of the 8 studied catchments. And we have inventoried and georeferenced all the charcoal production sites identified with this LIDAR. And we found a density of 1.2 CPS per hectare. This is really higher than other regions, for example, in the region of Hesse in Germany, with a lot of charcoal, but only a density of 0.3 charcoal production sites per hectare. But this is coherent with some other region in France, for example, in the forest of Chailloux in Franche-Comté. If we make the sum of all the surface of these charcoal production sites, we are close to less 1% of the total study area. That seems to be very important and not negligible for the functioning of this ecosystem. But to have a best idea on the influence of this density of charcoal production sites on finally the headwater streams, we realized and analyzed of the relationships of the proportion of charcoal production sites at the upstream of the study stations and the concentration of some elements, and we found that it seems to have an increasing of phosphorus in water when the spatial density of charcoal production site at the upstream increase. So here again, an enrichment, an increase of the disponibility of phosphorus due to the presence of charcoal-rich soils due to these sites. So to conclude, first, the anthropological analysis of these charcoal production sites give us some tendencies of the vegetation since the last high period of charcoal productions. It is coherent with some palynological analysis realized by Gorevo et al. That show that there is a high decrease of tree species between the 5th and the 6th century, 15th and 16th century, and with an increase of coniferous, of pinus especially, until today. So our results are coherent with these results. And we can think that there was a high importance of woodland management and type of management from this high period of charcoal production until today. But we cannot respond to the question, is there a difference of distribution of taxa between today and this period of charcoal production? Because as we have seen before, the distribution of species was really dependent on topographical parameters, and so not so dependent to artificial or at least anthropic parameters. Is there the case today? I cannot say it for the moment. And we can say also that we have found a possible influence of the legacy of these charcoal production sites of the charcoal burning, because it seems to have an increase of phosphorus as well as in the litter and directly in the soil that could have an important impact on the functioning of the trophic network of these streams. So we can make it in parallel with some studies of the properties of charcoal-rich soils that have tendency to stock some elements of the soil and to release them after. And this phenomenon could be put it in relationship with some eutrophication phenomenon that have been seen in many places, also in Europe, due to pollutions, but maybe also by old activities that have a legacy today. These types of analysis must be done in other places because we are here in a specific geological context with a sandstone that is quite acid with a lot of sequestration of some elements. But in other places like in calcareous conditions, the results should be different. Thank you to thank you for your attention, everybody. In the future, see you.